Greetings and welcome back. We now move to the page Politics in Government, and I'm going to give you a definition. There are many definitions for politics, but certainly one way that you can look at politics is that politics are the activities or affairs engaged by a government. It could be a politician, it could be a political party or a political party leader. It could be an interest group or an interest group leader. I gave you two very famous uh, theorists, I would call them, who gave other definitions of politics. You'll notice that you see Aristotle a lot, and I should cue you in that of the ancient Greek theorists, and the three most famous are Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. They're certainly not the only ones. There are a variety of sophists, for example. But of the ancient Greeks, Aristotle is my favorite. And the reason is because he's less interested in the normative. And more interested in what is. And certainly, if you look at the definition in your notes, where Aristotle claimed that politics is the interaction between individuals in groups and society, primarily involving the values of power and authority. Certainly, this is a man that is writing well over 2,000 years ago, in fact, closer to 2,500 years ago than 2,000. And yet, that definition makes a lot of sense today. A more modern political scientist in this case, Harold Laswell, wrote a book that I own. I've read. I was strongly influenced it through my mentor, who was influenced by Laswell. You should put some stars here. You could see this on the exam, right? In 1936, Laswell wrote that politics is about who gets what, when, and how. In fact, that was the title of his famous book. And I told you that my mentor was one of those political scientists who, throughout most of his career, wrote on what we call resource allocation, right? And resource allocation is who gets what, when, and how. All governments deal with scarcity. Some governments deal with a lot more scarcity than others, obviously, but in all societies, there are more demands than there are resources available. And so, in this particular case, governments have to decide who gets what, when, and how. So, if you're more of an order person, perhaps you may want more money allocated to the military, to police forces, to courts, cops, and jails to protect people from one another. If you are more interested in equity or equality, you may want more money to go for social welfare, for health and welfare programs, for example. And in fact, if you look at the two leading expenses in American counties, so I'm in Merced County. When I teach in Stanislaus, I'm obviously in Stanislaus County, and some of you live in both of those counties, and perhaps some of you don't even live in either of those counties. But if you look at the counties in California, those are the two things that county governments spend the most money on. The number one ticket item, the most expensive, are health and welfare programs. And the number two is public protection, the courts, cops, and jails. So certainly, when you look at issues of order and equality, certainly that would create a debate about how much money should be allocated to both. And that is why I have listed that a budget is a good way to look at what the priorities of government are. So, what is government spending money on? And you might be able to make some assumptions about, quote, winners or losers, although I'm not sure I really like that term personally. So there's kind of an introduction to politics. I then turned to the heading political culture and politics. And to me, political culture are distinctive ways of looking at politics. For those of you who uh, have lived in different parts of the country, or for those of you who frankly took Political Science 1 from me, you may remember my discussing Daniel Elazar. Elazar did not believe that the United States has one political culture. He believed that the United States was so large and so diverse that there were three distinct political cultures in America: a moralistic culture in the western U.S., an individualistic culture in the northern United States, and a traditionalistic culture in the southern United States. And politics looks different in those three regions because of their cultures. Now, Roskin, who, remember, I told you I will use this term. This is your textbook author, so if you're wondering, that means that I'm referring specifically to the textbook here. Roskin, in chapter 1, makes the claim that as political scientists, we need to concentrate on quarrels over time, or I would underline long-term political issues. In essence, what Roskin is saying is that journalists, whether it's television or a newspaper or a blog, these people tend to react to current events, whatever is hot today. And that item may be hot for a day or two, and then you move on. Roskin is saying leave current events to the journalist. That's where that belongs. But issues that carry on for a long period of time, and for example, when we get to our first country, Britain, Roskin, and I agree with him on this, and I'll tell you when I agree and when I disagree. Roskin makes the claim that in Britain, since World War II, the chief quarrel in Britain has been about the welfare state. How large should it be? How comprehensive should it be? And to some degree, that has been a major quarrel in the United States as well, although the two societies have addressed it a bit different. Great Britain created the National Health Service in the late 1940s, 1948 to be exact, and the United States is still debating whether or not there should be a national healthcare system. So political culture is important. It's distinctive ways of looking at politics. Here we are describing the basic attitudes that people have towards one another. Should people participate in politics or should they be discouraged? How reverent should they be? Should they be active participants to the actions of the state, or should they just be subjects of the state? Roskin talks about sources of political culture, including political socialization, and most experts make the claim that the most important early agent of political socialization in America, for example, would be political socialization. So think about this. Let me give you an illustration of a difference in political culture between the United States and, say, France. I don't know if this is true in your case, but in my case, I told you my parents were not very political people. Neither of my parents went to college. Neither of them completed high school. And yet, I knew the political party that my mom and dad belonged to, who they supported. My dad usually did it with a lot of colorful language. He used a lot of profanity. But I knew exactly what political party my dad belonged to and how he felt about the party that he didn't belong to. On the other hand, a major study, a very well-known study, the Converse study, and I'll refer to it later when I get to France, said that most French children are not even aware of the basic orientation of their dad. And in this case, they just looked at children and their fathers. And French voting patterns tend to be much more volatile. In the United States, my dad pretty much supported the same political party for essentially his whole life. Um, and I happened to belong to that party, although my dad and I got into a lot of political debates because I'm a little more open to supporting candidates of the other party if I think their candidate is good, and he wasn't. He basically voted for the same party all the time. In France, there are creations of new parties that can arise almost instantaneously. And let me give you an example to show you this would never occur in the United States. The president of France, Mr. Macron, founded a brand new party. He broke away from the Socialist Party, founded a brand new party in March, which is a centrist party. And the very next year, he was elected president. Now, think about that. In the United States, the Democrats and Republicans have dominated American politics forever, almost for the whole history of the Republic. And certainly, these two political parties have dominated American politics since the Civil War. In France, there is a tendency to back the flamboyant. Now, certainly you could say that's true in the United States because whether you like Mr. Trump or dislike him, he's certainly very flamboyant, he's very media oriented or whatever. But notice that he went through the system. He sought the nomination of the Republican Party to get elected president. Macron did not do that. He founded a brand new political party that France had never heard of. And within a year, by the next year, he was elected president. This also happened with Giscard d'Estaing. This happened to a lesser degree with Pompidou. So in France, there is a much more open system in terms of party creation than in the United States. But we certainly have seen dramatic changes in political culture because of what I have listed in the notes, seismic events. For example, the dominant political party in the United States until the Great Depression was the Republicans. Every American president elected from the Civil War into the Depression, except for two, were Republicans. And then the Great Depression hits, we get a voter realignment. A lot of people change their political loyalties in America, and the Democrats became the dominant political party until the late 60s and early 70s. Certainly, for me, the Great Depression was the dominant political event of my grandparents' lifetime, and I think they lived their whole life trying to make sure they did not ever experience it again. For my father, Pearl Harbor. My dad was a child, and he said that World War II was the event that he associates with. And we'll talk about political generations later, Mannheim's theory, in which he says that generations are shaped by great events. For some of you who are a little bit older, maybe it was 9/11. But for many of you, and certainly for your younger brothers and sisters, it might be this pandemic. Pandemics have occurred throughout world history. Many people believe that what the major downfall of the Roman Empire were due to pandemics, that the population of Rome declined dramatically and it brought down their empire. Of course, we think more famously of the barbarians. We haven't had a great pandemic in America for 100 years, but now we are experiencing one. And my guess is that this pandemic will have some consequences that will change political and social behavior over time. And for many people, this fear that has occurred during the pandemic may follow them their whole lives. In the next mini lecture, I want to get to classifying governments politically. I'm going to talk about Aristotle and his influence on the American political system and give you a few insights into that. So have a wonderful day, everyone. See you soon.